Imagine the absolute worst day of your life, like the deepest grief you've ever felt.
Yeah,
Or maybe, the sharpest, most blinding physical pain you've ever endured.
right. Just an agonizing experience.
Exactly. Now, I want you to just hold on to that feeling for just a second.
Okay.
Now, imagine if, biologically, that exact state, that absolute rock bottom, was actually the absolute happiest you could ever possibly be.
Wow. That is quite a thought experiment.
Right. Imagine if your biology was basically re-engineered so that what you currently consider your highest, most transcendent moment of joy was just your mundane, everyday baseline.
That's incredible to think about.
It really is. So welcome to part 3 of this massive deep dive. If you've been on this journey with us, you know we've been navigating some incredibly turbulent, pretty dark philosophical water.
We really have. It's been a heavy trip.
Definitely. I mean, in part 1, we looked at Adam Lanza's Eulovism, and that gave us this incredibly grim diagnosis of life.
Yeah, the idea that value itself, like the very biological and cultural machinery of wanting and needing, is basically a terminal disease.
Exactly. A disease that just creates endless lack and deprivation.
Right. And then, we follow that up in part 2 by exploring the internalist response to that profound darkness.
Which was a major shift.
It was. It was that realization that suffering isn't bad because some external moral law hovering out in the cosmos says it's bad.
Right. Like a rule book in the sky.
Yeah, exactly. It's bad because suffering internally objects to itself.
Right.
The ought not isn't a rule imposed from the outside. It is, the fundamental, inescapable, lived reality of the experience of agony.
It presents itself as something that just absolutely demands to be ended.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are taking those two massive ideas and aiming them straight at the ultimate final question.
The concept of paradise.
Yes, the big one. Can a world without suffering actually be stable? Or is utopia always, inevitably, destined to become a prison?
That's the core tension we're looking at today.
Yeah. Like, can paradise actually be engineered for sentient life without relying on coercion or delusion or just, total stagnation?
We have an incredible stack of sources for today's mission, too.
We do. We are centering on this core text, Paradise After Suffering. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Nietzsche, Pierce, Eulovism, and internalism.
Right, and we'll be bringing in David Pearce's The Humanistic Imperative, too.
Yep, alongside Brian Thomasic's ratings on suffering-focused anti-realism. And we're going to wrap it all in that internalist metaethics that we built in part 2.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is. I have to say, moving from the grim diagnosis of our previous sessions into what might be the wildly ambitious solutions proposed for the future of sentient life. It's a profound pivot.
It really is, but we have to tread carefully here because paradise is arguably one of the most dangerous concepts in the entire history of human thought.
Dangerous how? Like, historically?
Oh, absolutely. The word itself is a historical minefield. You say paradise, and, well, it can mean the religious Garden of Eden, right?
Right.
Or it can mean a perfectly engineered communist utopia or a hyper-rational technocracy.
Or some kind of supposed end of history where all political struggle just ceases entirely.
Exactly. And the historical danger is that a promised paradise almost always justifies immense cruelty against anyone who resists the blueprint.
Because the logic of the utopian builder is always like, well, if I am building perfection, anyone standing in my way is an enemy of perfection.
Spot on. And therefore, their suffering is just a necessary temporary cost on the road to heaven.
Man. Let me try to make that concrete for you listening. Imagine a visionary architect who designs the absolute perfect house.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right, so the temperature is always exactly 72 degrees. The lighting perfectly matches your circadian rhythms.
Smells pretty nice so far.
Yeah, and the nutritional paste it dispenses provides exactly the optimal macros for your biological longevity. It is mathematically flawless.
Right. The perfect system.
But there's just one problem. When you step inside, the architect locks the door from the outside and throws away the key.
Oh, wow.
And when you complain that you want to feel the cold wind on your face or, I don't know, eat a slightly burnt piece of toast because you miss the taste?
Right, the human elements.
Yeah, the architect just points at the blueprint and says, but look at the math. You are in paradise.
Yeah, that tension right there between the perfection of the design and the experience of the person trapped inside it, that is the whole problem.
Right.
The blueprint is flawless on paper, but the lived reality becomes a suffocating cage.
And that is exactly how Eulovism, which we unpacked in part 1, views this entire project.
Yeah. If you look at paradise through the Eulovist lens, it just completely falls apart.
Because Eulovism hates the whole structure of value, right?
Exactly. It says that life imposes value, value creates a contrast between here and there, and we just spend our lives desperately trying to get there.
So for a Eulogist, paradise isn't the cure for the disease of life.
Far from it. For Eulovism, paradise is the disease hallucinating its own completion.
Wow. Hallucinating its own completion.
Yeah, it's the ultimate delusion of the organism chasing a final satisfaction that simply does not exist.
Like a dog chasing a mechanical rabbit on a track.
Yes. It's the organism thinking, well, if I just get this one last perfect arrangement of molecules, if I build the right society, the striving will end.
But the striving is the structure itself.
Exactly. You can't satisfy the void. You can only feed it temporarily.
That brings us to our second paradigm today, which looks at that exact same biological striving, that exact same void, and says, hold on, we can actually just fix the machinery.
Right. Enter David Pearce and what he calls paradise engineering.
Yeah.
Pearce is fascinating because he takes all that Schopenhauerian pessimism and flips it into a biochemical engineering challenge.
Wait, before we go further, let's ground that for the listener. What exactly is Schopenhauer's take here? Why is his flavor of pessimism so relevant?
Sure, so Arthur Schopenhauer was a 19th century philosopher, and he basically argued that the fundamental nature of the universe is a blind, irrational, ceaseless striving. He called it the will.
The will, okay.
Yeah. And for conscious beings, this means we are trapped on a pendulum.
A pendulum.
Yeah, we desire something, and the lack of it causes us pain. Then we finally get what we want, and after a brief moment of satisfaction, we immediately swing into deep existential boredom.
So life is just swinging back and forth between pain and boredom forever.
Exactly. We are driven by a hunger that can never be permanently fed.
The ultimate treadmill.
The ultimate treadmill, yeah. And Pearce looks at that biological legacy, the pain, the anxiety, the depression, the constant dissatisfaction, and says, yes, Schopenhauer was right about the biology,
Right.
but he was wrong to think it's metaphysically inevitable.
Oh, interesting.
Suffering is just a legacy of Darwinian life. Natural selection shaped these aversive states because they served genetic fitness.
Right, because a hominid that feels perfectly content and blissful sitting under a tree.
Gets eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas a hominid plagued by chronic low-level anxiety survives to pass on its genes.
So Darwin didn't design us to be happy. He designed us to survive.
Exactly.
We are running legacy survival software that punishes us with misery just to keep us moving.
Which is why Pearce proposes we rewrite the source code.
Okay, how?
He advocates for using biotechnology, genetic engineering, specifically tools like CRISPR-Cas9 and advanced neurotechnology,
Do what, exactly?
to permanently abolish involuntary suffering in all sentient life.
He wants to replace our entire motivational architecture.
Yes, instead of being driven by pain and deprivation, he wants us driven by what he calls gradients of intelligent well-being.
Gradients being the key word there.
Right. You don't do things because you are running away from misery. You do things because you are moving from a state of baseline bliss to an even higher, more intense state of bliss.
So it's the abolition of aversive experience, not the abolition of experience itself.
Exactly. You still have experiences that just don't hurt.
Okay, but then, to complete our trio of paradigms, we have to introduce Brian Tomasic.
Right.
Because Tomasic shares Pearce's intense urgency about reducing suffering, but he comes at it from a completely different angle. He is fundamentally an anti-realist.
Yeah, let's define anti-realism in this context. It essentially means Thomas doesn't believe there are objective moral facts floating out in the universe, written into the fabric of space-time.
So there's no grand cosmic law of right and wrong.
Right. He distrusts the idea of paradise as an objective metaphysical destiny that all rational beings will just magically converge on.
Okay.
For Tomasic, moral statements ultimately reflect preferences, our emotional architecture, and our capacity for empathy.
So if he doesn't believe in an objective utopia, what is his goal?
Putting out fires, specifically astronomical fires.
Astronomical fires.
Yeah, Tomasic looks at the future and sees what he calls risks, or risks of astronomical suffering.
What kind of risk are we talking about?
Yeah. This includes the potential for artificial intelligence to generate mind-boggling amounts of computational suffering. Or, just looking at the present, the ongoing staggering scale of wild animal suffering happening right now on Earth.
Right. Every second, millions of animals are being eaten alive, starving, or dying of disease.
Exactly. So Tomasic says we don't need a grand unifying theory of a perfect utopia. We just need to stop the hellish torment happening right in front of us.
We need to reduce extreme suffering because our empathy demands it, not because the universe commands it.
Perfectly said.
Wow. Okay. So we have three incredibly distinct views on the table right now.
We do.
Eulovism says paradise is a biological delusion. Pierce says paradise is a biological mandate, like an engineering project we have a duty to finish. And Tomasic says dreaming of paradise is an unnecessary distraction from the urgent work of just putting out the fires of astronomical S-risks.
Right.
So how on earth do we reconcile these?
Well, we reconcile them by introducing the concept of the internalist shield.
Which we unpacked a bit in part 2.
Yes. Internalism acts as the essential safety rail between a beautiful dream of paradise and a dystopian nightmare.
Okay, let me try to map this back to our architect from earlier.
Go for it.
So the dystopian version of paradise is the architect forcing you to eat that perfectly engineered nutritional paste because his math says it is objectively good for you.
Right. It's an external blueprint imposed on you against your will.
But the internalist version of paradise is totally different. The internalist architect doesn't force a diet on you at all.
Exactly.
Instead, they cure your chronic stomach pain. They repair your biology so that whatever meal you freely choose to eat doesn't cause you agony.
The foundation of the project shifts entirely. What's fascinating here is that paradise is incredibly dangerous when it is grounded in an abstract idea of the good.
Like some external blueprint of what society or human behavior should look like.
Yes, it becomes infinitely safer when it is grounded in the ought not, which is strictly the removal of involuntary suffering.
Because the ought not of suffering isn't an opinion up for debate. Like when you accidentally touch a hot stove, the pain doesn't politely ask for your philosophical stance on thermodynamics.
If it doesn't.
It inherently screams stop. The phenomenology of the pain itself presents as something to be ended.
And that inherent to-be-endedness solves a massive philosophical headache we can call the Euthyphro problem of paradise.
Oh, Plato's classic dilemma. Let's adapt that for our utopia.
Sure.
The original Euthyphro dilemma asks, is something pious because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it is pious?
Right, and applied to utopia, the dilemma asks, is this society a paradise because it fulfills some objective standard of value? Or does value aim at this society because the society is objectively good?
It's circular.
Very circular. Because if paradise is just whatever fulfills a specific value system, then it's totally arbitrary. It's just someone's preference being enforced by the state.
Right, and if paradise is pursuing some external good, we have to ask what gives that good any authority over our actual lived experience.
Which leads us directly to what the sources refer to as the darkroom problem.
We definitely need to explain this because it's central to why utopias fail.
Okay, so the darkroom problem asks you to imagine a pitch-black room. Inside this room, completely hidden from anyone's experience or consciousness, sits an objective moral good.
Okay.
The problem is, who cares? If this good doesn't interact with the lived experience of conscious creatures, if it doesn't make anyone's life better or prevent anyone's pain, why should we bend our entire society to serve it?
And authoritarian utopias always claim they have access to that dark room.
Always. They claim they know what the good is, and they demand that everyone's lived experience bend the knee to it, even if it causes massive suffering.
But internalism bypasses the dark room entirely.
It does. It says, do not begin with the definition of the good. Begin with the phenomenological fact that suffering internally objects to itself.
So internalism converts paradise from a final, rigid blueprint into a negative constraint.
Exactly. The rule isn't you must live exactly like this. The rule is there can be no hell inside the design.
No hell inside the design? That is a profoundly liberating constraint.
It really is. It doesn't tell you what to build. It only tells you what materials you are forbidden from using.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you cannot use agony, despair, or involuntary panic as load-bearing pillars in your society.
Precisely.
I hear that and I see the logic, but I have to admit, my common sense anti-utopian alarm bells are still ringing pretty loudly.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Because the common sense objection to utopia is that perfection usually requires police.
You're running right into the Dostoevsky challenge.
Yeah. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky's Underground Man makes this visceral, almost angry argument.
He really does.
He says that if you were to somehow calculate all human desires mathematically and build a literal crystal palace of rational happiness where nothing ever went wrong, humans would smash it.
We'd tear it down.
We would smash the crystal palace just to prove we are free, irrational agents and not just piano keys being played by the laws of math and science.
And Dostoevsky deepens this critique significantly in the Brothers Karamazov with the parable of the Grand Inquisitor.
Right, right.
In that story, the Inquisitor literally arrests Jesus when he returns to Earth.
Which is just a wild premise to start with.
It is. And the Inquisitor argues that humanity cannot bear the terrible burden of spiritual freedom. So the church has taken away their freedom and replaced it with bread, peace, and security.
They are treated as managed children.
Exactly. Kept in a state of controlled happiness by an authoritarian elite.
Hold on, I'm looking at Pierce's biotech solution right now, and I'm getting serious 19th century literature flashbacks.
I can see why.
If someone manages my brain chemistry, I mean, how is that any different from the authoritarian control of the Grand Inquisitor?
It's a fair point.
Isn't David Pierce's Paradise Engineering just the Inquisitor with better biotech? Instead of managing us with bread and dogma, they manage us with gene drives and CRISPR.
It is the most vital question you could ask. If we are just replacing political control with biological control, we haven't achieved paradise. We've just built a more inescapable prison.
Exactly.
But this is where the internalist defense is so crucial. You have to look closely at what Dostoevsky's actually attacking.
Okay, what is he attacking?
He brilliantly refutes coerced paradise. He refutes managed happiness. But he does not refute the abolition of involuntary suffering.
How do you separate those two, though? Like, if you engineer my brain not to feel pain, aren't you managing me?
Not necessarily. Freedom does not require agony. Agency does not require despair. Let's break down the biology here.
Okay.
There is a fundamental difference between nociception, which is the raw nerve signal that says, your hand is touching something hot.
Right, the informational signal.
Exactly. There's a difference between that and the subjective, agonizing experience of suffering. And we already have rare, real-world examples of this.
Like who?
Take Jo Cameron, a Scottish woman who has a natural genetic mutation in her FAAHOUT gene. She literally feels almost no physical pain or anxiety.
Wait, she feels no pain at all, like none.
Almost none. She can burn her arm on an oven and only realize it because she smells burning flesh.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But she doesn't panic. She doesn't experience the aversive agony. Now, does she lack free will? Is she a managed child?
I mean, presumably not.
No, not at all. She makes choices. She has preferences. She lives a full life. She just does it without the biological torture chamber of anxiety and pain.
Wow.
Dostoevsky's underground man rebels because the Crystal Palace eliminates his choices and treats him like a machine. But Pierce's vision, constrained by internalism, isn't about removing choices.
So I can still choose to do difficult things.
Absolutely. You
Yeah.
can choose to walk in the freezing rain. You can choose to write a heartbreakingly sad poem. You can choose to isolate yourself and think deeply, all without your brain chemistry plunging you into suicidal depression.
I see. So Dostoevsky is worried about the loss of agency. And internalism basically says, we agree. Keep the agency.
Yes.
Keep the smite, the irrationality, the creativity. Just remove the biological software that forces that agency to operate under the constant threat of agony.
Exactly. We can keep the human spirit intact without the torture. But then, we face the next great 19th century Russian critique, which tackles the spirit itself.
The Tolstoy challenge.
Yes, Leo Tolstoy.
Yeah.
The spiritual critique.
Right. So Tolstoy looked at the technological and social progress of his time, the rise of modern luxury, the railroads, the incredible wealth.
And he worried it was all a distraction.
Yeah, he worried it was just distracting human beings from profound moral truths like compassion, humility, and love.
So if Tolstoy were to look at Pierce's genetic engineering, his likely objection would be, well, is paradise without moral transformation just luxury with better chemistry?
Right. He would worry that a society of perfectly blissful, genetically engineered consumers might just be existing in a state of permanent moral anesthesia.
Let's think about that scenario for a second. Imagine taking a pill that makes you feel perfectly, blissfully happy and content while you completely ignore a friend in need right next to you.
That's a horrifying image, honestly.
Your friend is crying, and you're just sitting there with a chemically induced smile. That feels deeply wrong.
It feels like a total betrayal of what it actually means to be a relational human being.
And internalism absolutely validates that feeling. It offers a crucial middle ground here. Tolstoy is entirely right to remind us that suffering is deeply relational.
It's not just a biochemical signal in a vacuum.
Exactly. Suffering is alienation, cruelty, shame, moral injury, abandonment. If we just numb the biology without addressing the relational truth of how we treat each other, we have failed spectacularly.
We've just built a society of euphoric sociopaths.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
But Tolstoy's solution has its own trap.
Right, because if the answer is spiritual transformation, how do we enforce that without becoming tyrants ourselves?
That's the problem. Tolstoy's spiritual solution becomes oppressive the moment it turns purity or humility into a moral law that is rigidly imposed over a sufferer.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if you tell someone struggling with severe clinical depression, you don't need medication. You just need to find spiritual humility to cure your pain. You are imposing an external moral blueprint on their internal biological suffering.
Yeah, that's incredibly damaging.
It is. The internalist defense says that suffering reduction doesn't have to replace love and empathy. It can actually deepen them.
Let's push that further, actually. How does removing pain deepen empathy? Because usually, we think shared pain is what creates empathy in the first place.
Think about your own bandwidth. When you are consumed by a migraine, or panicked about making rent, or paralyzed by a severe anxiety attack, how much mental bandwidth do you realistically have left to care deeply for a stranger?
Almost none. I mean, you are biologically locked into survival mode.
Right. If your brain isn't consumed by the desperate, panicky noise of your own anxiety and pain, you actually have more cognitive and emotional bandwidth for genuine compassion and relational depth.
That makes a lot of sense. You help your friend because you love them, not because their crying is causing you aversive stress that you just want to silence.
Exactly. So we've survived the underground man, and we've navigated Tolstoy's fear of moral anesthesia, but now we have to face the fiercest critic of all.
Oh boy.
The philosopher who practically built his entire worldview on the absolute necessity of suffering, Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yeah. He is deeply suspicious of this entire Paradise Project.
Oh, he hates it.
He suspects that the dream of a painless utopia is just the fantasy of the exhausted last man.
Let's unpack the last man for the listener, because it's a key concept.
So in Nietzsche's philosophy, the last man is basically the exact opposite of the Übermensch, or the overman.
Right.
The last man is humanity at its most stagnant and comfortable. These are creatures who have just given up on greatness, on overcoming, on pushing boundaries.
They just want flat comfort, safety.
Yeah, a little pleasure for the day, a little pleasure for the night. As Nietzsche put it, they blink and say, "We have invented happiness. They have no stars left to reach."
Nietzsche would look at David Pearce's Abolition of Suffering and see it as the ultimate revenge of the weak against life itself.
Because for Nietzsche, life is struggle. It's hierarchy, it's danger, and it's overcoming.
Yes. To abolish suffering is to abolish the friction that creates greatness.
So if we remove the risk of falling, do we also remove the thrill of climbing the mountain?
That's the question.
Does removing tragedy remove art? Like, can you have a profound, world-shaking piece of music if the composer has literally never had their heart broken?
It is an incredibly seductive argument, because Nietzsche sees something undeniably true about human history. We can and do transform suffering into greatness.
We forge immense depth in the fires of trauma.
We do. Some of our greatest art and deepest wisdom comes from profound agony. But here is the internalist dismantling of Nietzsche's challenge.
Okay, lay it on me.
The fact that suffering can be transformed into greatness does not mean suffering is justified. Transformation is not retroactive justification.
Or, as the sources put it so beautifully, we can honor the flowers without defending the wound that forced them to grow.
It's a profound distinction. Nietzsche turns suffering into raw material for greatness. But internalism asks a very simple question. Does that resulting greatness answer the suffering from within the experience of the sufferer?
Right. Like if a child dies of a terrible disease and the parents write a beautiful, world-changing book about grief.
The book is great, but does the book justify the terror and agony the child felt in their final moments?
Internalism says absolutely not.
No. And more importantly, internalism provides a concept we can call height without hell.
Height without hell. I really like the sound of that, but how does it actually work in practice?
Internalism distinguishes danger from suffering and contrast from aversion. Nietzsche assumes that to have high peaks, you must have agonizing valleys.
But that is just a lack of biological imagination.
Precisely. Paradise need not abolish height. It must abolish hell. We can still have immense difficulty.
We can have aesthetic intensity, mystery, profound philosophical depth.
And non-destructive risk. We can have all the friction necessary for growth without ever forcing a sentient being to drop below hedonic zero into states of involuntary despair.
So we aren't creating a padded cell. We are creating a climbing wall where you can still sweat, you can still strive, you can still fail to reach the top, and you can try again.
Yes.
But there's a safety harness that guarantees you won't shatter your spine on the concrete below.
The climbing wall versus the padded cell is the perfect way to understand David Pierce's actual mechanics of paradise engineering.
Let's get into the specifics of how this is supposed to work, because Pierce has a catchphrase that is central to this whole project.
Paradise engineering is not the abolition of information. It is the abolition of aversive information.
We need to define abolition of information because the classic sci-fi fear here is wireheading.
Oh, wireheading.
Yeah. Wireheading is the idea of putting an electrode directly into the pleasure center of your brain, hitting a button, and just sitting in a corner drooling in a state of endless static euphoria until you literally starve to death.
And wireheading is a complete failure of information.
Yeah.
You cease to interact with the world. Your brain is telling you everything is perfect, even while your body literally dies.
Right.
Pierce completely rejects that. He advocates for gradients of intelligent well-being. Imagine your current emotional spectrum. Right now, on a normal human baseline, it might range from a -10, which is absolute unbearable agony,
To a +10, which is sublime transcendent bliss.
right. And most of us hang around a slightly fluctuating 0. We feel okay, a little bored, a little anxious, maybe a +2 after a good meal, a -3 after a bad day at work.
The hedonic treadmill just keeps pulling us back to 0.
Exactly. Pierce proposes using genetics and neuroengineering to shift the entire baseline and just defeat the hedonic treadmill altogether. Imagine we re-engineer the human genome, so your new baseline spectrum goes from +10 to +100.
Wait, let me wrap my head around this. So my absolute worst day, my absolute lowest moment of failure or disappointment is a +10.
Yes.
It feels like what I currently consider the best day of my entire life.
Yes. Think of it like a video game, where the developers removed the game over screen and the death mechanics, but they kept the level progression and the exploration.
Okay.
You still have preference, motivation, and learning. You still pull your hand away from a hot stove, but the signal isn't agonizing pain.
It's just a non-aversive, purely informational physical cue that says, this tissue is being damaged, move your hand.
Exactly.
So I still strive to write a great novel or build a company, but I am motivated by the desire to move from a +20 to a +40.
Yes. Rather than being driven by the panic fear of dropping into a -5 of failure and humiliation.
Oh.
And crucially, you don't just acclimate to the +10 and feel numb. The engineering ensures the gradients remain dynamically rich.
But this brings up the inevitable listener question, like the one everyone asks the moment they hear about eternal bliss.
Won't we just get incredibly bored?
Right. If I'm always at a +10 or higher, won't the contrast just vanish? Won't an eternal Tuesday afternoon of bliss just become excruciatingly dull?
It is the most common objection. And the internalist response requires us to fundamentally rethink our biology. We have to realize that we completely misunderstand what boredom actually is.
Okay, how so?
We tend to think of boredom as a neutral state, or maybe the result of having too much peace. But boredom is not the absence of suffering.
It's not.
No. Boredom is itself a form of restless deprivation. It is a highly negative, aversive state.
The dopamine dip.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Boredom is your brain suffering a lack of adequate stimulation and punishing you with dopamine withdrawal to force you to go do something.
Wow.
It's the evolutionary whip cracking on your back saying, don't just sit there, go forage, go mate, go secure territory.
So boredom is literally a form of suffering.
Yes. Which means a properly engineered paradise doesn't just pump you full of static dopamine until you are numb. It actively solves the biological problem of boredom.
So if you are bored, you are experiencing an aversive state, which means the paradise engineering has failed.
Exactly. The goal is an architecture that preserves novelty, deep curiosity, and play without needing the whip.
I see the logic, but I have another major objection.
Let's hear it.
Is it fake?
Huh.
Like, if my GIS line is a +10 because someone tweaked my genome with CRISPR or gave me a neuroprosthetic, isn't that happiness somehow less real than the happiness I earned through hard work and struggle? It feels unearned.
This is where we have to look at our current biology with brutal honesty.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to romanticize our natural state.
Sure.
But Darwin engineered our current moods. Natural selection designed our baseline of anxiety, our fleeting moments of joy, our immense capacity for deep depression.
Right.
And natural selection was a blind, terrible, incredibly cruel engineer. It didn't design us to be happy. It designed us to survive and reproduce in a hostile environment.
So every feeling I have, from profound love to the taste of a strawberry, is just biology doing its thing.
Yes.
Darwin built the current machine. Pierce is just saying we can build a better one.
Exactly. To say that Darwinian happiness is real and engineered happiness is fake is just a naturalistic fallacy. All consciousness is biologically instantiated.
So engineer does not mean fake.
No, a +10 feeling of awe is a +10 feeling of awe, regardless of whether it was granted by millions of years of brutal natural selection or a highly precise gene edit.
Okay, but there must be some constraint, right?
Yes. The only constraint internalism adds, and this is vital, is that the bliss must remain answerable to reality.
What does answerable to reality mean in this context?
It goes back to the wireheading problem. Your bliss cannot be a delusion that disconnects you from truth.
Like if you are smiling blissfully while your house burns down around you, that is a failure of information.
Exactly. But if your bliss is integrated with your cognition, if you are tracking truth, correcting errors, forming genuine relationships, advancing science, and responding to the world,
You're just doing all of it from a baseline of profound well-being.
then it is entirely real. The experience preserves meaningful discrimination.
Okay, but if we actually achieve this, if we successfully abolish suffering and no one ever drops below hedonic zero, what actually remains?
That's the big question.
How do we choose what to do? Because our entire current culture, our art, our economics, our daily habits, they're almost entirely built on running away from pain or fulfilling a lack.
Yeah, you are.
If I'm not driven by the fear of poverty, the fear of loneliness, the fear of failure, what actually moves me forward?
This is the great existential question of the post-Darwinian world.
Yeah.
Directionality above zero.
Because we are so defined by our wounds that we can hardly imagine a body without them.
But the internalist analysis insists that motivation, the movement from here to there, can be entirely non-aversive. We just have a hard time imagining it because we're so steeped in Darwinian biology.
So what is the vocabulary of paradise then? If we aren't using words like fear, anxiety, lack, or despair to drive our actions.
The sources outline a really beautiful vocabulary of non-aversive significance.
Let's hear it.
Beauty invites. Joy illuminates. Curiosity draws. Play explores. Truth clarifies. Agency shapes.
Wow.
None of these require involuntary suffering to exist. Think of the flow state of a jazz musician completely lost in improvising, or the pure, unanxious curiosity of a child exploring a tide pool.
There is massive directionality there. There is intense focus and preference. But there is no suffering.
It requires a massive shift in how we think about moral symmetry, because we're taught that pleasure and pain are just two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, standard utilitarianism often treats joy and suffering as perfectly symmetrical. A +5 of pleasure on a spreadsheet cancels out a -5 of pain.
But internalism rejects this symmetry entirely,
Explain that asymmetry. Why don't they cancel out?
because the absence of joy is not equivalent to the presence of suffering. If I don't experience the sublime joy of eating a perfectly ripe peach today, my life isn't automatically a tragedy. My lived experience isn't demanding that the universe stop and give me a peach.
But if I experience the acute agony of a broken femur, my lived experience is actively screaming no. It demands immediate cessation.
As the sources phrase it, joy may invite suffering objects.
I love that. Joy may invite suffering objects.
Think of it like a beautiful painting versus a fire alarm. A painting invites you to look at it, but you can choose to walk past. A fire alarm demands your attention and forces you to react.
That implies that paradise doesn't have to be some totalitarian project that maximizes a specific mandated type of joy for everyone.
Not at all.
Like, it doesn't have to force you to listen to Mozart because the state determined Mozart is objectively the best joy.
Exactly. It just has to silence the fire alarms. It just has to leave the field open and free from the ought-not of suffering.
And once the biological torture is removed, beings are free to respond to the invitations of beauty and curiosity in their own wildly diverse ways.
Which perfectly transitions us into the politics and practice of paradise.
Because it's one thing to philosophize about gradients of bliss and the vocabulary of joy. It is an entirely different nightmare to actually implement genetic engineering and neurotechnology on a global scale.
It's terrifying, practically speaking.
How do we actually avoid using people as raw materials for a utopian vision? If we look at the 20th century, every time someone tried to engineer a new perfect human, it ended in mass graves.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is why the practical internalist constraints must become our guiding principles. Paradise engineering cannot, under any circumstances, be a state ideology imposed by force.
Because coercion itself causes severe relational and psychological suffering.
Exactly. That violates the very principle of removing aversive experience. The project must be voluntary. It must be pluralistic, allowing for profound neurodiversity and wildly different conceptions of the good life.
And consent sensitive.
Highly consensus sensitive, and crucially, it should be reversible, especially in its early stages. So beings aren't trapped in an architecture they didn't choose and cannot alter.
So we don't start by mandating that everyone get a CRISPR injection to make them happy. Where do we actually begin this project in reality?
We start with the obvious fires. We don't begin by trying to impose a total form of life. We begin by treating clear, unambiguous cases of involuntary suffering.
Like what?
We use gene therapy to cure horrific genetic diseases. We eradicate chronic physical pain. We treat severe clinical depression and treatment-resistant anxiety.
And we look beyond humanity, too. This is where Brian Talmasic's risks come back in.
Yes, the internalist shield applies to all sentient life. We have to address the staggering horrors of factory farming, which is arguably the largest engine of concentrated suffering on the planet today.
Yeah.
And eventually, Pierce and Tomasic both argue we have to look at wild animal suffering.
I can hear the pushback on that already. People will say, well, nature is natural. The lion has to eat the gazelle.
Nature is natural, but natural is not a moral alibi.
Right.
Just because a lion eating a gazelle is part of the Darwinian ecosystem doesn't mean the gazelle isn't experiencing profound agony as it is torn apart.
And Tomasic points out the staggering scale of this.
He does. And Pierce suggests that eventually, using advanced genetic engineering like CRISPR gene drives, we could compassionately redesign ecosystems.
We could alter predator populations, introduce pain-free traits, and address wild animal starvation without destroying the biosphere.
It's theoretically possible.
The scale of that responsibility is almost paralyzing, honestly.
It is massive.
But it leads to one final, deeply profound concept touched on in the sources. We've mentioned it briefly in previous deep dives, but it really rears its head here. Open individualism.
Open individualism is the metaphysical theory, most famously detailed by philosopher Daniel Kolak, that consciousness isn't a bunch of isolated, separate souls.
Right.
It proposes that there is ultimately only one subject of experience, looking out through billions of different biological windows.
We need to explain the thought experiments behind this, because it sounds like pure mysticism at first glance. But it's actually grounded in philosophy of mind.
Yeah, think about split brain patients. When the corpus callosum connecting the two hemispheres of the brain is severed, you can essentially get two separate streams of consciousness in one skull.
Wow.
If consciousness can be split and theoretically merged back together, where are the hard borders of you?
Or think about the teletransportation paradox. If a machine scans your body, destroys the original, and prints an exact atom-for-atom copy on Mars, is that copy you?
Open individualism argues that the only coherent answer is that personal identity is an illusion. There is only the universal field of consciousness.
So you are the gazelle being eaten, you are the lion eating it, and you are the human observing it.
Exactly. And if open individualism is even partially true in terms of how we should ethically model the universe, the stakes of paradise engineering become truly cosmic.
It means that killing God, which in this metaphor means destroying all life to end suffering, the kind of omnicidal conclusion that a radical eulogist might be tempted toward, isn't a viable policy option.
Because you can't just turn off the universe. If consciousness is a fundamental property or field, then it will inevitably arise again.
Evolution will just start over, and the suffering will begin again from scratch.
You cannot escape the problem by destroying the current iteration of life. As the sources state so powerfully, if God is the field of experience, then salvation means ending hell, not ending light.
That is profound.
The only rational, compassionate path forward is to do the agonizingly hard work of science, politics, and ethics, and biologically engineer the capacity for suffering out of the architecture of consciousness itself.
Ending hell, not ending light. What an unbelievable journey this has been across these 3 deep dives.
It really has.
I mean, we started in part 1 with Adam Lanza's terrifying, grim realization that life imposes value, and that value inevitably creates a disease of lack and suffering. And then we moved in part 2 to the internalist breakthrough, the realization that the badness of suffering isn't some external rule we have to debate in a dark room, but an undeniable internal fact of the experience itself. It objects to itself.
It presents as to be ended.
And today we finally arrived at the shield that makes utopia possible. We realize that we actually can engineer a paradise. We can rewrite the cruel Darwinian code as long as we focus relentlessly on removing the ought not of suffering rather than trying to force an artificial architect's blueprint of the good onto everyone.
It is the ultimate shift. moving from imposing an abstract perfection to eliminating tangible cruelty.
I want to ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own life right now. When you strive for your goals, when you go to work, when you build relationships, when you push yourself to make art or build a business, are you trying to build a personal crystal palace to protect yourself?
Are you just running away from the fire alarms?
Or are you trying to navigate your own gradients of well-being? Can you imagine a version of your own life, your own daily existence, where your motivations are driven purely by curiosity, by play, by beauty, and by love, rather than being constantly whipped forward by anxiety, fear, and lack?
What would that life look like?
As you think about that, I want to leave you with one final profound question to mull over.
It's a question that pushes everything we've discussed today to its absolute conceptual limit.
Let's hear it.
Let's say humanity is successful. Let's say we actually use biotechnology, gene drives, and neuroengineering to literally rewrite the capacity for suffering out of existence so that no sentient being on Earth can ever again fall below hedonic zero.
Okay, we've achieved the biological paradise.
If we do that, does the concept of morality itself go extinct?
Wait, really?
Think about it. Morality evolved and is entirely necessary to govern how we treat each other in a world where we can cause harm. Ethics is the study of how to navigate a landscape filled with fire alarms.
Right.
But in a post-Darwinian world, where it is biologically impossible to cause pain, where the physical and psychological capacity to feel involuntary suffering literally no longer exists in any nervous system, do ethics simply vanish?
When there is absolutely no harm left to prevent, does morality become a relic of our dark evolutionary past, leaving behind a universe governed entirely by aesthetics, curiosity, and art? It really makes you wonder, if that visionary architect from the very beginning finally learns how to unlock the doors, maybe we don't need the architect anymore. Maybe we just walk outside into the garden and for the first time in the history of life on Earth, finally start living.